Throughout the world, there are communities in conflict with each other. This could include Black Americans and the police, Indians and Pakistanis, or Israelis and Palestinians, to name a few. Their troubled history can span centuries, and in that time, a lot of hatred builds up. But is it ever justifiable that one community entertains prejudice notions against another? After decades of demonstrated bad behavior by a group, is it understandable that some would feel uncomfortable around them, at the very least? And if so, what are the implications for racial and ethnic relations across the globe? The question is exactly what it sounds like. Is it ever right to be prejudiced to another group? Does that ever make sense? Is it ever understandable? Or is that just morally completely wrong and there's no logical reason why a person would do that? So we'll do opening statements for this, then we'll get cracking. Let's go.
We can't already say that anymore.
Katie, please.
So you said, is it right? And then you said it's understandable. Of course it is. People do dumb, unreasonable, and illogical, immoral stuff all the time. It's not a good idea. It's not helpful, but humans have a stupid tendency to like divide into groups and categorize quickly because that's just what we do. It's not good and it's not helpful, but it's absolutely understandable. Like if somebody hurts you, it's very normal to then assume that a lot of people that look like that person might hurt you as well. It's not very smart though.
Okay. Dylan.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to come out here with a crazy take that's somewhat similar to Katie's. By that, I mean it's not radical at all. But, I will say that some dynamics between groups can be understandable. And as we know, prejudice against certain groups exists, no matter what. However, when we're talking about whether on a moral standpoint, whether it's justifiable, for the most part, it's really not. It's pretty immoral to not judge individuals at the individual level, especially when we're dividing them into mutable characteristic groups, which I think is really problematic. So I will say that it's understandable, but of course, it's not morally correct.
Destiny?
Yeah, exactly the same.
Is
Is there anybody that's going to disagree with this take? I'm so curious. Who's going to be the brave one that's like, you know what? I think actually, if you have a lot of bad experience in the group, you can be racist towards them.
Mr. Girl? All right, you go next then.
Oh, I was just saying, I was trying to build up anticipation. You want me to just do it now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I guess my take is that there's an overlap between these two, that it's not just that, like, we know prejudice is wrong, so we don't have it, or if we know it's wrong, then we won't have it, or then we won't be able to act on it, or acting on it is wrong, but having it is understandable. I feel like there's it's like a spectrum. So it reminds me of an argument I got in with this black professor, black studies professor. Where we argued for half an hour about whether it's true that it's safer if you cross the street when you see a black person coming. As opposed to, if there's a white person on one side and a black person on the other side, is it safer, are you safer from the likelihood of crime happening to you if you cross the street to go on the same side as a white person? So my argument was statistically, obviously that's true, but it's also immoral to do that. So you have to do this dance of like, how much are you going to allow statistical knowledge of a group's behavior affect how you view one person in that group? And I think that choice between safety and morality is kind of the conflict that there always is with this topic.
Okay. Vaughn?
Surface level. Yes, statistically, if you're looking at the statistics and having no further information either other than statistically, black people are imprisoned and commit more crime than white people in America, right? So, but that is ignoring the entire nuance behind exactly why that is. Because
well, if someone's
like
going to mug you, it doesn't matter It doesn't matter why they're gonna like when it comes to a raw self-protective moment. It's like birds learning not to eat like certain frogs. Like that. If it's pure self-protection, which is the hypothetical, which are you safer doing? It's not which are you more racist doing. You're more racist if you cross the street. But what keeps you safer? And a lot of times prejudice and racism.
So we are still in opening statements. You can respond to her as soon as we're done. All right, Mr. Girl. But
Well, you let her respond to me, but okay, whatever.
But no,
I believe you were done. Sorry, if you were not finished.
Well, your statement was a response to my statement.
Yeah, I know. But this is still opening statements.
Yeah,
don't worry.
because
I know.
Okay.
You totally should have stopped her. I understand.
Okay.
totally should have.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
it.
Okay.
That was super out of line.
Okay. Well, I just believe that I mean, the reason why my opening statement was skipped because I totally agree with basically the first thing that Kate said was that's exactly how I feel. But yes, I would also say that building on this circumstance, I would probably cross the road if it was dark and at night, and if there was a man walking towards me.
I was going to give that example. Yeah.
I would probably do that. If there was a woman walking towards me, I might not cross the road. If there was a man walking towards me, I probably would. So I'm not saying that it is like, I wouldn't say like, oh, then that means that I'm sexist. I don't think that crossing the road because you see someone coming at you as a potential threat is necessarily racist. But
Prime,
if you're
since
saying
this is continuously a response to what I said, am I allowed to push back?
I promise you, you're going to be able to when we get to you. When we open it
I know,
up.
but why is she allowed to respond to me, but I'm not allowed to respond
Sometimes
to her?
people respond to each other in the intros, right? It's fine.
The next time I want to go fucking last.
Okay. No problem. All right.
And when he goes last, I want to respond to him.
Okay, great.
then we'll be in a place where we can both respond to each other.
Vaughn, are you done?
Yes, it was an opening statement. I was almost done, and then I got interrupted, so I felt like I needed to start again. So.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's go to GSU Gambit.
Yeah, so I'm from a pretty bad area. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with people having prejudice, and I want to explain this more. I think the examples that have been given are, I mean, people seem to be afraid to say them, but I don't think they should be. But so I think that if, like in the hood, we call it street smarts. You have to know where you are, and acting on that knowledge of knowing where you are, I don't think there's anything bad about it. For instance, I act differently around police in Atlanta than I do police in my hometown. And that's because sometimes these police officers have different ideologies and they aren't actually your friends, right? And they're just trying to imprison Black people in some cases. Not all police at all, not even most police, but in certain areas, we have to understand the ideologies around us. When I lived in Florida and I was around Trump rallies, I knew that this wasn't a place that I should frequent because of like the same amount of data that we would have to support some of the violence that happened in Florida. So I don't think there's anything wrong with prejudice. I think there is a problem if you never test your prejudice though. So there are certain situations where I've been in where I want to see if my like innate feelings are going to be realized. And you could say in those cases, I put myself in somewhat of danger, but I think in order to update your internal model, that's smart to do. So there are times where I suspend my prejudice and I go into otherwise what I would see as risky situations to see how these things play out. And generally speaking, it doesn't play out negatively. I haven't had a chance where I was like testing something and it played out negatively. So I think it's okay to be prejudiced. I think if you're a person that never attempts to validate your prejudicial feelings against a group, then that's a bit bigoted, and that's maybe where it becomes more racist. But generally speaking, I don't think there's a problem with prejudice.
Okay. Well, we'll go to Pisco next and to be last. Pisco.
Yeah, the art of human experience, of making rules, of giving advice, that is, in essence, discrimination. Of course, a balance needs to be struck. That's a fatuous and boring thing to say if one were to say that. The question entailed by this is, what is that balance and what should shape that balance? If you make a rule that says only people of a certain visual acuity are able to drive, you're discriminating against people who can't see as well. If you are casting a part for Scarlett O'Hara and you're only trying to cast from a group of people who are femme presenting, that is discriminatory. The question is, on what grounds and in what cases are those kinds of categories acceptable? I think for the most part, categories on the basis of race, for instance, of oftentimes on religion, national origin, immigration status, most of the time don't make sense. I would never, for instance, justify a policy of arbitrary detention just because there's a history of a certain group in a given country doing terroristic acts, even notwithstanding some statistical proclivity of a given group, because the costs associated with doing so are so high. And so in this question, the interesting aspects are not sort of establishing that there is a balance to be struck, but what grounds do we generally consider discrimination to be unacceptable, and on what grounds is discrimination acceptable?
Okay. Doobie.
Okay. So, I mean, I think we can all think of cases where racial prejudice has been used to build and fuel political movements. So pragmatically, it might be a justifiable way to get a politician into office if the political goals we intend to reach by getting that politician in office are important enough, right? So this could be a viable avenue. So I don't think it's reasonable to just throw it off the table entirely because we consider it moral. Also, like, just on the Arab and Israeli thing, if an Arab Palestinian has spent their entire lives living under like brutal oppression by the Israeli ethno-state, which has a law that explicitly outlines that the right to exercise national self-determination in Israel is unique to the Jewish people, that is in their law, is it wrong to harbor racial prejudice toward Israeli Jews? Would we tell that Palestinian that it's wrong to point at that group as a whole and say, hey, fuck you for doing this to me? And when we know that the vast majority of Jews, I think it's like 90% of Israeli Jews are Zionists and want this state to exist in some form, right? And we can pull up stats in New York right now and find that the people who commit around 90% of the rapes and murders in that state every year, going back decades, are Black and Hispanic. That is just the case, right? Whites and Asians combined account for less than 20% of that in a given year, right? So can we really fault a white woman alone in Central Park at night for, being a little more scared when she sees a Black guy walking toward her? And I think we can all agree that, like, we should try to avoid prejudice. We should try to avoid racial animosity, right? But when we have stats like this 90% stat in New York, or the fact of Israel's nation state laws, I think it's reasonable, and I think it's justifiable for some people to protect themselves, to form political movements, to build support for an idea. I think latching onto that prejudice, being aware of that prejudice, and the reasons that prejudice exists, I think it's totally viable, and I don't think we should dismiss it outright because we might think it's moral.
All right, opening up to the panel.
The problem, of course, what Doobie is saying is that he's, I think, suggesting that there's some legitimacy to enacting some public policy on behalf of mere statistical correlation between a given race and some kind of bad action. Is that what you're suggesting, that there's something policy-wise that we're able to glean from these stats?
I mean, in the case of like New York, right? Yeah, I think policy-wise, we could look at the stop and frisk program, right? Disproportionately, Blacks and Hispanics were checked, but also these people are responsible for 90% of the rapes and murders in that state. Right? So I think it might make sense to check those people more often if you're a cop who's looking for people who might be involved in that kind of activity.
So suppose that you had the opportunity and you were president of New York, the supreme overlord of New York. Do you think, for instance, it would make sense to have like a lower standard for arrests or for a search of someone merely because of their racial background? That would make sense.
No, I don't think that would make
Why
sense.
would it not make sense?
But I wouldn't fault a police officer, right?
Well,
for
no,
double
you
checking.
just.
Wait, hold
I'm
on.
asking about policy, and I want.
I understand.
Why.
Well, I think there's policy in New York now that would say that there can't be any kind of racial prejudice in police searches, right? So if there's an indication that a cop is checking a person specifically because they're black, or they're double checking this person because they're black or because they're brown, right? This cop would get into trouble. I don't think that should be the case, given that 90% of these types of crime in New York are committed by this group, which is a very small minority within the state.
Right. So I'll direct you to the question once more, which is, would you make a lower, on the basis of these statistics, would you make it a lower threshold if you had control? You know, you could change the law. There's a little thing called the Equal Protection Clause, but suppose you could change it. On the basis of those stats, wouldn't it make sense, using your logic, to lower the threshold for searches and arrests in the state of New York?
Yeah.
That's
why I brought up stop and frisk, right? Like I said, blacks.
So you're in favor of such a policy, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the reality is what it is, right? 90% of these crimes are committed by blacks and Hispanics in that state.
So
why would we be checking? Why should the cops be checking every Asian dude's pockets? Right? Like this is where the problem is. So we go to where the problem is.
Answer the male question. So lower standards for searches and arrests for men across the board.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, so
and then lower standards for young people.
Wait, Doobie, does this apply to like other demographics too that might be like predisposed to committing more crimes? And if so, like, are there certain metrics we can use for like, say, a poor person? Because poor people disproportionately commit more crimes, right? And it just so happens to be the case that a lot of the time that you see these like minority demographics being poor, right? So if I saw a guy driving around a beater like Honda Civic from 1997, would that justify me being able to go and like search his car because, you know, disproportionately poor people commit more crime and he looks poor to me?
Well, no, but I mean, this is kind of the reason. Wait 1 second. So this is kind of the reason that poor communities tend to have a greater police presence, right? Because that is where the crime is, and we understand that that's where the crime is. So because that's where the crime is and that's where the gangs are, we have more police patrolling up and down the street. And that's why they arrest more people in these communities, right? So it's not just that this specific dude looks poor. It's that we know that there's an issue in these poor communities with crime and gangs and violence and drugs. So we go where the problem is. I don't really.
So we should basically pass policies that say, no, if you're poor and poor people commit more crime, we can't search you on that. But if you're black who commits more crimes, we can just, you know, be suspicious of you because you're black.
Like I said, I don't think we should say, oh, I'm suspicious of you because you're black. I don't think that should be the case. But if there's an indication that a cop specifically selected to stop and frisk a person because they're black and Hispanic, right? I think that's
why. I mean, you just said you'd be okay with a lower threshold for searches and arrests. Why shouldn't that threshold be if I just feel like it?
Yeah, not just that, but why does that apply to like poor people? I see someone who looks poor to me. What's the difference between that and a black person?
Wait, hold on. I just told you this is currently what we do, right? So maybe it's not specifically outlined that because this area is poor and these people are poor, we're going to expect them to be committing more crimes. But we know that this is where the crime is, and this is why these communities tend to be quote unquote over policed.
Yeah, but we're talking about stop and frisk, right?
And the basis is not race. The basis there is crime level, and it's associated with race, but the basis is not race. It would be an unconstitutional thing for police to say, we have a policy of enforcing laws more strictly, openly against black people. You know, it would be hard to prove that, just so you know, but that's not the basis under which these searches and arrests and increased patrols are happening. And so what you're talking about is a correlation, and we're not sort of purposely, or at least the supposed reason is not to purposely search black people more.
Yeah. Can I interject?
Katie, please.
I was just about to say this. So when you prompted this topic, Prime, I went and Googled prejudice. And the first thing that came up on Google was like preconceived notions without reason, something of the sort. I think when something is a statistical variable, that's not having prejudice. If there's a statistical likelihood that men are assaulting women more than women assault women, me being wary about men, it's not me having a prejudice around men. It's reasonable.
I think the prejudice is when you project that awareness of the group onto an individual.
So what I was going to say is that that when those statistical occurrences happen, or when there are reasonable ways to assume something, we then extrapolated to immutable characteristics. So to say that 90% of rapists are Black and Hispanics in New York is a statistical, I assume it's correct, but that doesn't mean things about Black or Hispanic people. Like Fawn said that earlier too. Like there are circumstances that lead to these things. The statistic is not that way because they're Black. It's because there are circumstances that drive that statistic.
Mr. Girl's point is that you can't use this statistical data to say the person in front of you may be a person that may rape you, and that's where the prejudice actually does exist.
Well, I would say you can use it to do that. I think you can use it to do that, but I think that you're also doing something a bit immoral. So if somebody gives you a bowl of Skittles and says, hey, the yellow ones are 5 times more likely to kill you. But you're not going to just take a big handful of them. The first thing you're going to do is sort out all the yellow ones, but that's because they're not people. So if you're doing that to people, then you have to balance it with if Black people committed a murder every single day, all of them without fail, then I think we would all agree that it's like, okay, I guess we're going to start policing Black people more severely, I guess, because it's 100%. And then I think more racist people are going to say, well, who fucking cares? Even if it's slightly more, then we should keep an eye on them and follow them around and stop and frisk them. And then more progressive people are going to say, you know what? They might commit more crimes. It might be a little more dangerous, but I'm willing to live with that in exchange for equality and freedom because that's what I believe in.
So very quickly, I'm going to finish what I was going to say. So it's fine that there are statistics. And what individuals choose to do, if me and Fawn choose to go to the other side of the street because it's night and there's a dude there, that's individual choices. That does not mean that I would support policies that enforce then segregating men and women to different sides of the streets. So individual choices are not the same as policy making.
I mean, would a hiring decision by a private company, that would be a personal choice too, wouldn't it?
No.
You think... Can I ask that question?
Hold on. Before you even get there, Katie, and I see your hand, Fawn. Before you even get there, I see your hand, Doobie and GSU. Before you even get there, those individual choices have consequences, right? So that's kind of where I want to go with this question. Maybe I just said a word clear enough for you. But you're saying, well, yeah, it's an individual choice that I go to another side of the street. That one is less. The consequences of that are pretty tiny. But what about there was that woman in Central Park who a Black man approached her because she had her dog off a leash, right? Yeah, right?
Yeah,
and
so
she called
I agree
the cops,
with you, right?
And she called the cops, right? And she said, he's threatening me, he's trying to kill me, right? That's the other side of that. So that's the prejudice. Having consequences that could have been deadly. He could have died because.
So I agree with you.
Well, to be clear,
that's a more interesting part of that question.
But to be clear, so his behavior made what she did, I think, justifiable, because he was acting like a fucking creep.
Forget about the individual.
If you read his Facebook post,
wait, hold on, wait, real quick. We shouldn't get into the specifics of the story because we're sidetracking. I understand what you're saying, though, Doobie. That guy was a creep. It was way different than how it's presented, but we should agree.
Okay. So I agree with you that that's a much more interesting part to focus on, but we went straight into policy making, and that was the specific point, right? I'm much more interested in talking about the lady at the park than about whether stop and frisk was legitimate, because it wasn't.
I'm afraid it's not limited to policy decisions on a governmental level. Think about racial covenants, for instance, or the practice of racial discriminatory hiring. Those are actions that could be properly construed as individual choices, but they're still subject to public scrutiny, and for us to criticize them and for us to really think about whether it's justified for private actors.
And that's a much more a gray area that we can discuss thoroughly. That is not on the same level as New York deciding to make an official police policy to stop and frisk.
Perhaps
it's not the same.
But we can't just pretend just because it's a quote individual choice that somehow it's outside the realm of scrutiny.
Yeah, and I'm not pretending to do that either. I think that lady in the park and a person in government doing choices that are making choices that are affecting people because they're prejudiced are different. but both can be discussed and both have moral implications.
I think the reason why we're trying to draw a parallel between these two is because it's kind of inconceivable that you would have a society where we said, okay, everybody is allowed to individually be racist, but we can't have any racist policies. I think that's like the disconnect. So even though they are fundamentally different actions, if you're selling that on an individual level, it is going to filter through either legislatively or at least to companies the decision.
So that is, I get that's how that sounds. I thought it was very clear from how I started that I don't think individuals should act in racist ways. I force myself to stay on the same side of the street when there's a guy at night because I don't want to act in that way, because I think it's not fair to the guy, even though I probably should cross the street. So I don't exempt individuals from making shitty, racist, or discriminatory choices, but it's also
you don't fault?
Not the same.
So
what?
You don't fault people for racial discriminatory choices?
No. She says she don't.
I do. Sorry.
You do fault. Sorry, my bad.
Let's go to Fawn and GSU. Mr. Girl, did you have any previously? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So we'll go to, all right, then. We'll go to Fawn, Mr. Girl, GSU, Dylan.
I just wanted to quickly point out something that was mentioned in chat a while ago about I don't know if it has I think it has relevance. There's statistics from the FBI saying that nationally 67% of rapes are committed by white people.
So the reason why we look at these stats, we have to look at the per capita basis. So for instance, let's say that 50% of rapes were committed by one group and there's 10 of those people, and then 50% of rapes were committed by another group and there's 10 million of those people. Well, if there's only 5 of those 10 million people committing rapes, but if there's 5 of the 10 people committing rapes, you're probably going to be more likely to be aware about those 5 of the 10. So even if the absolute percentage is bigger in one group, if the per capita or the relative is smaller, that's usually how people are making decisions. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, I just wanted to bring attention to that. I agree.
Yeah, white people are very bad, I understand.
Still, Destiny, you know that when we're talking about a per capita demographic, right, white people account for the majority of America still.
What you just said.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So, Mr. Girl, I'd cross the street if you were. No, I'm just kidding. Mr. Girl, go ahead, please.
I think that you kind of have to make a decision here. I don't think you can be really hands off. We're saying that police have the leeway to decide who to investigate based on how they feel. So if the police feels that you look suspicious or doing something suspicious, they can investigate you. And then there's prosecutorial discretion. The DA might feel like dropping your case. The judge might feel like sentencing you. The jury might feel a certain way about you. All of those steps can have prejudice or racism built into them. So it doesn't make too much sense to say you're okay with all of that, but you wouldn't be okay with just putting it in the law and saying, well, we should just investigate black people more. And in a way, that would just be more honest and direct. And I think if you're not okay with people getting investigated or sentenced longer or charged more because they're black, then I do think you kind of have to do something to try to stop that.
Of course, that's a ridiculous and ignorant thing to say. We would not be, just because we have discretion someplace in the area of criminal law does not mean that we are tolerant of racist exercises of that discretion. And just because it happens to be the case that some of that seeps into our systems with or without conscious choice does not mean that we should allow active and flagrant uses of racist policies. And so I don't know what you mean. Just because racism exists, we must tolerate its most explicit form?
No, I think I was saying the opposite of what you're saying.
Okay, then I'm not understanding.
Okay, well, let me explain. If you have cops that are so racist that they are only targeting black people, for example, and rampant people getting locked up for crimes they didn't commit, sentenced for outrageous amounts of time, I think that it makes sense to address that with a policy aimed at preventing that from happening. To me, allowing it to happen is the same as enacting a policy that says it should happen. In effect.
Oh, I see. So you're not in favor of what? I'm sorry. Then I was conflating you with Doobie's position, which was that we should.
I'm a Jew, so
okay. So you're not in favor of.
When the
it sounded to me
cops
like
start locking people up because they feel like it, it makes me personally uncomfortable. But also, I care about my black brothers and sisters too.
To be clear, you would be against
Bless
any
you.
law sort of institutionalizing or making formal what already happens with respect to racism and policies. You'd be
Yeah.
against what Dubé said he was for.
I am against laws that say it's okay to over-police black people, as I believe they are
Yeah.
currently over-policed, yes.
And you made what I was trying to say, basically. There's
Yes.
obviously there's like personal responsibility, but we can't institutionalize racist shit. It
Right.
doesn't make
So-
sense.
But on
So
the-
I got a question to ask
Hold on,
everyone
hold
here
on,
really
hold on,
quick.
hold on.
Okay.
Jishu, then Dylan.
Yeah, so a lot of these things that y'all are talking about are kind of sort of all in a mixed bag and what happens in society. So the reason why I like completely object to what Doobie was saying was because discriminatory policing is how you remain with these stereotypes in place. So I think during stop and frisk, and somebody quote me on this one wrong, but the percentage of time that they found contraband or violations during stop and frisk with black people was less. I'm pretty sure that's like empirical.
Yeah, real quick, just to factually to back up what you're saying. So the problem with the stop and frisk stuff and the disproportionate like lowering the threshold for pulling over like black people or Hispanic people in the past is that as they've done those lower thresholds, the hit rates are not improving at all. So it seems like even when they engage in discriminatory behavior, the hit rate falls, which would mean that the discriminatory behavior is probably unjustified. Now that's a factual argument that I think is separate from our philosophical discussion, but to ground it in reality, the discrimination doesn't seem to be helping. Copying doesn't help.
Yeah. So and that's what I'm saying. So all of these things get mixed together because and I appreciate what Mr. Girl said. The other thing that people don't look at is when we look at these per capita stats, I agree that a lot of them look really bad. But we don't get the stats for things that either didn't go to trial or people that didn't get arrested and all of these things. Like, for instance, when I was in college, I was in the car with one of my white friends. We were completely drunk and it was late at night. And we got stopped by the police. Luckily, he was driving and I wasn't driving. He was driving, and the cop that stopped us knew his dad was the sheriff, so we completely got off, right? But if I would have been driving, I wouldn't have had that luxury, right? Because that inbuilt prejudice in the system from like in groups, I wouldn't get that treatment. So
Well, maybe
type
if your
of-
dad was a sheriff, you might have. But I think that's part of.
it's
I think
less
that's part of the.
likely. It's
Well,
less
yeah, it
likely
is. I
that
think
we
that's
would
part
be
of what's.
connected in that way.
That's what makes it hard to talk about racism is that you'll never know. You'll never know what would have happened if you'd been
Well,
driving
we
with
do
your
know
dad's
it.
sheriff or
We-
not.
we-
All
Hold on. We do
Yeah.
know that I am less likely to be
yes,
as connected as somebody white, as being a part of the algorithm.
sure,
Can
yes,
I-
for sure. I'm
Yeah,
just saying that
sure.
it makes it a
Statistically.
little more amorphous, because you don't know for sure. But I think that in a way that
We-
almost makes it worse.
We do know that we can look at personal relationships of police officers in lots of communities and say that it's empirically true that black people don't have as many connections to the police in most of the areas, even the areas that black people live in. Predominantly, they don't have more connections to the police than others. That's empirical.
Yeah. So can I ask? So it is true that blacks and Hispanics were disproportionately hit by stop and frisk, right? And that the hit rate was lower. I think it was like 12%. But I think that given that like crime to some extent like driven by poverty, and blacks and Hispanics are more likely to live in high poverty areas. If you have a hotspot where you have high crime, high poverty, it's way more likely that the people living there are going to be black and Hispanic. So you're going to get a much higher hit rate with those kind of people, right? But that doesn't really take into account the cool down effect, right? So if you have a hotspot and they know that the cops are coming around checking everybody's pockets for guns, for drugs, whatever the fuck, right? A lot of people are going to stop carrying that shit around, right? Because they don't want to get randomly stopped by the cops and go to jail for it, right? And this is why I think we can look at the stats and show that there was a reduction in crime rate in a lot of these areas, right? That benefited these communities. So it's not so stop and frisk was not like just bad across the board. Yeah. More black and Hispanic people were stopped. That's because they live in the high crime areas that need to stop and frisk.
Well, what's bad is the explicit racial targeting of people on the basis of their race. And that's something you said that you are in support of. You're okay with lowering the standard for searches and arrests on people just because they're black. You said that explicitly. And so when you have, okay, maybe it's as an incidence of searching in poor areas, you get more Black people, more Hispanic people. But you said that explicitly it's okay if that basis and judgment is made solely on the basis of race.
Wait, hold on. I think you're.
You also said you shouldn't do that with poor people when you talk to Dylan.
I think you're
You just
intentionally
said it.
misunderstanding what I said.
Hold on. I just want to correct a very false statement because I don't like when people make false statements. There is no indication that stop and frisk reduce crime overall. It only reduced crime in situations where there was probable cause. When it was just based off the people being Black or whatever, the additional use of stop and frisk almost made no difference. The additional use of stop and frisk almost made no difference. The stops only had a detectable impact on crime when the stops were based on probable cause, and these kinds of stops were very rare. So
and of course, probable cause, you wouldn't need a lower threshold for that anyway.
Exactly. That's the point.
Let's go to Blay.
Yeah. So I guess what we're all talking about here is kind of the next part I wanted to ask everyone here about, which is how do we feel about the implicit nature of discrimination and how it affects society, right? Because there's certain things we cannot prove, like whether someone was actively being discriminatory against someone else or not, right? So like, I think on an individual level, and I guess this is my quick take, right, is on an individual level, what Kate and Fawn were saying about crossing the street, when you have to make that kind of individual utility calculation for your own safety at night, something like being mildly prejudiced might be, helpful. But I think with the laws we have that are anti-discrimination, like the Civil Rights Act, things like that, those things help prevent discrimination. However, what we're talking about here is kind of the interplay between personal implicit biases and legal biases as well, which is why I wanted to hear kind of chat or everyone here's take on this, because I feel like that's more of the pressing issue.
So I think one of the easy examples of this is the Black sounding name, right? I think there's a large experiment that was done on whether people with Black sounding names got less callbacks even for the same qualifications and stuff. And it was overwhelmingly that Black sounding names is the easiest way to not get called back in an interview. So that's a place, and I think Destiny brought this up earlier, or maybe it was Pisco, but that's a place where those implicit biases, personal choices can have systemic impacts, even though in the act that's one individual, but across the broader society, it can be impactful to.
But are we saying they're implicit biases? Like most people, unless they're complete assholes, are not being racist on person. You can make a lot of shitty, racist, discriminatory choices because you have implicit biases driving you to those behaviors. Most people that toss out a resume, I'm not going to say most people. I assume a significant amount of people that toss out a resume that has a Black sounding name do not think, oh, a Black guy, I don't want that. It's just because it's a Black sounding name, they attribute a lot of negative qualities to it. And then they look at two similar resumes and they determine the white sounding name to just be a better candidate. That's what implicit biases are.
So expanding on what Kate said. Yeah, okay, wait. So expanding on what Kate said, though, I think it's important to note that if we're looking at two resumes side by side, we have a small sample group to look at here, right? How would we be able to determine whether someone's being racist or not, based on other variables and factors, right? So someone might go into an interview and this person might just gel more properly with the boss. They might have similar personalities, whether or not that's related to individual experiences, right? Just say you have two white guys.
It's really hard.
Nobody is saying
that's what I'm saying, right?
Wait, but nobody is saying that we're gonna be able to look at each individual interaction to determine if there was some prejudice or racism at play. But what we can do is collect data across all of these interactions and see if there's systemic bias. That's my point.
Right. So my broader point is, how do we find a solution for those problems? If these individual case-by-case bases we can't push too hard on, but we can't be too lenient on because there might be some racism going on, there might not be some racism going on. How do we actually solve the problem pragmatically? If we're talking about policy, I obviously thought the good way to start was with something like, again, the Civil Rights Act, non-discriminatory policies, right? But how do we expand on it from there? Kate, I heard you wanted to get in there. You get in there.
Thank you. Gambit, I'm sorry if I misunderstood you. When you said choices, I assume like a choice is usually something that I perceive as something a person actively chooses to do. When someone is being discriminatory and it's an unconscious bias, they're not actively choosing to do it.
Okay, can I
so
clarify something?
That
with
was
you?
like the.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Okay, are you saying that if I'm the boss and I see the black name on the resume, if I throw it out because I've noticed that most of the black people I've talked to lately are not good candidates and I just want the best candidate, that's not a conscious act of racism. But if I'm like, black people are fine
I disagree with you.
Well, I'm just asking you this. Okay, because you said it's not an intentional act of racism if I have some pragmatic reason for doing it.
No, that's not what I said. I said that as far as I understand unconscious biases, you hear the black sounding name and then all of the prejudice about black people come in, making that candidate less desirable in your eyes without you labeling.
I think what I don't like about your argument is the
I
implication that people don't like black people for no reason.
I think
Like it's not so like waiting tables, a less loaded example. Black people tend to not tip very well, on average. And so even black servers at the place I worked, I started out very idealistic, and after maybe a couple months, it was like everybody was fighting like, please don't sit them in my section. The black servers were much more forward about this, saying like, I don't want these fucking black people. And then everybody else had to just, kind of like, it's very uncomfortable, but money is money. However, it is also racist to do that, but it's not racist like my preconceived conceptions about black people are affecting me, making me not think that they're going to tip me less. They're actually going to tip me less. So what do we do about that? What do you do?
That's not the same as the resume research.
Mr. Girl, that's very, very disanalogous because we're talking
Yeah,
about
it's not the
money,
same
which
at
is like
all.
a dependent factor on people's survival, right? If we're talking about
okay, so it's somebody like me who started out saying like, yeah, I'll hire anybody, yeah, I'll talk to anybody, and then you block out an hour for this interview and this interview and this interview, and after enough interviews, you're like, Jesus Christ, it's like the black people are 3 or 4 times more likely to be unqualified for this job for some reason. And like, I don't want to be a bad person, but this is costing me time and money.
The research about the resume thing is, sorry.
So in a hypothetical, at what point is it?
Wait. So we need to talk about something that's like obviously more analogous here, right? Let's kind of remove the monetary factor from the equation.
Well, I just used your analogy as the analogy.
No, you gave me like an example which is heavily reliant on people's need for
say
survival. Let me offer you an analogy that's more analogous, okay? So you're a supervisor.
Said hiring black people for.
Wait. Okay, so say you're a supervisor at a McDonald's, right?
Yes.
You are in charge of hiring practices. However, you do not own this McDonald's. The monetary factor is not so much at stake for you here. And you're just making a hiring
out of my
decision.
Day, and my boss is like,
but you're interviewing white people, right?
Why can't we take this hypo
based on the same level?
Why can't we take this? Well, your hypo was, what if it's costing you money and you don't have the resources to do every interview? Is that your question?
It costs money to be non-racist. It costs
the answer
safety
is,
to be non-racist.
The answer is it's too bad. When you make policy, some people will suffer, and that's the cost of our policies. It could be the case that you would, I don't know, it would be more efficient if you discriminate on the basis of religion when you're doing stops in the airport. It could be that case.
I'm sorry.
Wait, I wanted to get in why my analogy is more analogous, right? Because my broader point.
Why not answer his?
I challenge you to answer my analogy. I challenge you because I don't like the stop and frisk example. I don't like that we can say like, hey guys, we found one example of a time racism didn't work and was like a bad idea. A lot of the times racism actually is pretty practical. It does.
Your analogy, it talks about what I was talking about. There is a lot of research when they just give a person that is in a hiring process 2 resumes that are basically identical and they just change the name on it. That is the research. That is the data that I'm talking about.
Okay, wait. Hold on. Let's think about the interesting questions. Okay, if racism is enacted and it doesn't achieve a good end, Obviously, every single person here says the racism is bad. That's such a boring, let's ignore that, right? The more interesting question, because this is what we grapple with on a daily basis, is it seems like there are times in our lives where people act in a way that's racist or is discriminatory towards some other characteristic that we would like to not be, but it seems like there might not just be a reason for it, but even some level of justification. For instance, if you go out and you're at a bar and you're with a stranger and a woman offers you a drink, you might look at that a bit different than if a man offers you a drink. There might be some utility there to the discrimination. Sure. Or also, let's say that you are a server in a restaurant and anybody that says otherwise has never worked in a restaurant before, okay, and can fuck off back to whatever you came from, okay? If you are a server in a restaurant, it is, especially Sunday mornings, it is the case that people have the impression of, and probably is the case, that black people don't tip as well as other people. Now, if that is the case, and there's some form of racism that you can enact, and it seems like there might even be a benefit to it, do you tell people, hey, even if you might have a heuristic that's serving you and is actually statistically providing you with good outcomes, should you act against that? That's the interesting question.
Yes,
Okay?
and that's
And
what
it's
I
one
was bringing up.
You should answer
That's
this
what I-
question, and the answer is that you're not factoring in the utility or the benefit of having equality writ large, and equality under the law or equality in people's perceptions. And that is a very, very positive thing about our country. Imagine that you had some policy, or that you knew that Republicans tip less, or you knew that Republicans were more prone to crime than Democrats. Would you ever think that it's conceivable to have a policy where, we always search Republicans more than Democrats? That would seem to sort of counteract our notion of equality for First Amendment purposes. And certainly in the racial cases and in the sort of religion cases.
And it's easy to say on the societal level, the problem is society moves in like chunks, right? You've got like people, then policies, then companies. But the problem is we're asking the people to change potentially before the society does, even though that might not serve the individual. On a grander political experiment, I agree with you. Of course, it's better if we all move in ways. All of us should coincide both politically, ethically, legally, judicially, everywhere with all of what our moral values are. But there are going to be times in these in these different parts of society where some groups of people are going to be disadvantaged by doing so, and can you compel those people to act?
That's any policy. And so, Destiny, why don't you answer Mr. Girl's question? Answer Mr. Girl's question, Destiny.
No, like watching you guys battle over this is fun.
If you had a store owner who is he cannot process all these applications in a fair way, it's just impossible, and you have if you don't racial discriminate and only look over the white people's applications, you go out of business. Do you say it's okay for him to discriminate in that case?
I think that I agree right now with US on the books that if you are an employer or if you are a landlord, like a building owner or something, then I think that you have a special onus on you not to engage in discrimination against certain protected classes, one of those being race. So I would say that no, you shouldn't be allowed to participate in the labor market as an employer if you're going to engage in discriminatory practices, because that type of stuff will roll downhill in the worst way possible. Because as soon as one business owner says, I can only hire Asians for my data crunching firm, otherwise I'm going out of business, well, everybody's gonna be like, wait, hold on, well, fucking, I'm only hiring Asians. And then pretty soon those are the only people getting hired, or through any industry. So I think that for employers, there's a compulsion there, for sure.
Hold on, wait, really quickly.
Hold on. This is why what Pisco said was important. He's trying to show y'all that when you say that it's not in law, but it's personal decision, effectively they can cause the same injurious outcomes. And that's what he's trying to get y'all to understand. And I would think that we would all say that even if we thought there was some utility to racism, we'd be against using it. This is why this is why there's applications of Black people that have even better qualifications, but they still receive less callbacks because of this topic right here.
Wait, really quickly, please. So would we say that if someone were to let's say they had a sushi restaurant and they wanted the sushi restaurant to have an authentic atmosphere, right? So they were specifically looking for Asians to staff the sushi restaurant because they didn't want people to come in.
Asians correlate very highly with being Asian. So that's not fair.
Okay. Yeah, but if
it's nearly
a black
100%.
or a white person, but if a black or a white person were to apply and they had all the skills needed to make the sushi, and you turned them away because they wouldn't fit the aesthetic of your restaurant, could we say that that's racist? That's racial discrimination that would be unjustified?
I would.
In that case, there's a so it would be the same thing if you're talking about a movie that's hiring a particular role. Or if it's Hooters and you're only hiring women as opposed to men, even though there's differences in kind of our legal standards for the discrimination, what will pass muster and what will not. I think in certain cases, you can find cases where it makes sense. Okay, if we're going to have someone play Barack Obama, we're not going to look at all of the Asian candidates. And so you can certainly find situations where that kind of artistic choice or aesthetic
So we just
choice.
we'd call them actors or a cast rather than employees, right? Is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
I
So if
think
I wanted
that's-
a restaurant with blonde girls
There's
or big
certain-
boobs staffing my restaurant, right? I would. Black girls tend not to have blonde hair and well, maybe they have big boobs. They tend not to have blonde hair, right?
What
so
are you
I would just get rid of all the
talking
black
about
applicants,
Hooters.
right? And only interview the
black
white girls.
tend not to have big boobs.
I stopped myself. I'm sorry, but just
That's,
a real
you've been a little
quick
racist
point,
so far, but now
a real
you're
quick
just being
point
crazy.
on the on the names thing, right? If you look at the names that they use for this study, right, I think it's really interesting to kind of break them down, because they chose names like Letitia, LaShonda, Tawanda, right? Names that I think a lot of people, maybe unjustifiably, would associate with lower class lifestyles, right? Kind of ghetto names, right? And they put those up against Amy, Hannah, Lori, right? Misty, right? So I think it could be that this was a class discrimination. Not
Wait,
so much
hold
a
on, real
racial
quick before we
discrimination.
spend any
Because
time on this.
really
Wait,
quick.
no,
No, I'm not. I'm almost done.
But
Because if they were to put names like Cletus, Jim Bob, Billy Ray on there, I'm sure you'd find people making the same assumptions about these people based on the application that they came from a certain class that might not be good for your restaurant, for your business, whatever the fuck. Right? You'd assume that they're like trailer trash types.
Okay, before we get too far off into that thing, okay, so that's the racism, though. That's the problem, is we're essentially saying that, like, well, there are a lot of black names, and they're associated with being lower class, so maybe it's just a class issue. Well, no, that's a race issue, right? That's like saying every time I see a black person, I don't want to deal with them. You're like, why not? Well, it's not because I'm racist, it's just because I think all black people are poor, so it's a class thing. That's not how that works. Right?
No, but wouldn't
Right,
we make a lot of assumptions
Yeah,
based?
exactly.
Hold on, wouldn't we make assumptions about like white people, for example, from like white names that we consider to be lower class? Cletus.
No, because there's
Jim
a whole bunch
Bob,
of trailer
Billy
trash.
Ray,
Like,
yada
no,
yada.
okay.
Like,
First of all, even people
of
in
course we
trailer
make
parks are
assumptions.
named Billy Ray generally, okay, right? You'll find a lot of people that have like relatively normal, like there's a whole bunch of white trash names that just sound like normal white people names, where people aren't going to see it immediately and be like, oh, well, that's just a white person.
I
yeah,
think
but there are a lot of them
No,
when
no,
we
no.
hear them,
Let me-
and
can I-
they
can I-
are
I'm going-
racist
No,
trailer
I gotta-
trash.
I have to
No,
say
so-
this.
so,
I'm gonna freak out if I don't say it.
Okay, all right.
I'm gonna freak
After
out.
Katie, then Mr. Girl.
Jesus Christ. Okay,
Yes.
fine.
I'll start dancing if you won't let me talk. Okay, I would love to
Well, that's-
answer
that works for me.
Destiny's
all the time.
question. I think that, and I don't mean this on an institutionalized level. So I think when we keep going back to, okay, you're saying no racist policies, but individuals like can still act in ways that would result in the same outcomes, even if you don't have the racist policies. I still see a clear benefit of like a country or an organization or whatever not have racist policies on their book, right? So that is always going to be a no for me, no matter what. In terms of the individual level, your question, Destiny, was like, when and how should the line be drawn on that? And I think that when Prime gave the example of like me and Fawn crossing to the other side of the street versus the woman who called police on the black guy in Central Park, I think where the line is drawn is how detrimental it is to the person that you're applying the prejudice on or the bias against. So when I cross to the other side of the street, that might hurt a guy's feelings that I'm scared of him. But I think overall, if I get raped, it's probably worse for me. So I'm going to take that one. If it's putting him, if someone is like, if you cross the street, I'm going to shoot that guy, then I'm going to not, So I think it depends on that.
I don't think that makes sense. I don't think you can compare your fear of what you're imagining this person's going to do to you to what you're actually doing to them. Like I could say, okay, I cross the street whenever I see a black person because yeah, that might hurt their feelings, but if they cut my head off and like put it in the back of their car, that's going to be worse for me. Like you can't just you can't compare rape, which you get what I'm saying?
Okay, then can you scrap that part and just address the main point that I said, if you want?
Yes.
I'll retract all of that. Never mind. No rape.
Well, okay. I mean, another thing is about that example that is interesting is that I've done these calculations, and the safety change in crossing the street to walk by a woman instead of a man is about the same safety of violent crime ratio of crossing the street to walk by a white person instead of a black person.
Okay, the reason why I'm saying what I'm saying
But
is
it is more
because
hurtful.
racism is bad. racism is bad, but we can't determine why people do what they do. So we can sit here and talk about how we need to mind read to tell people not to be racist, but I'm like, that's not going to happen. So what we can do is not have racist policies on the book and then make societal changes that reduce unconscious prejudices in people, so people will actively be less racist, whether they choose to be or whether they unconsciously are. That is my solution.
I think that's a good idea. I disagree about the part. You're welcome. I disagree about the part where we can't tell people not to be racist, though. I'm a messaging
I never
guy.
said that.
Well,
You can't
did
tell
say-
people not
you,
to be
you
racist.
actually
Okay, so
said
the-
exactly that. But
It's not
let
gonna
me explain my response. I think that the way we tell people not to be racist is very pedantic and insulting and unempathetic. And I think that people will respond much more to, people like Doobie. They're going to respond better to saying, "Hey,"
Not Twitch chat.
saying
Yeah,
like,
fuck
"You're,
Russia.
you're, it's understandable that you want to throw out these black named resumes. Like, given your experience or waiting tables, it's understandable that you don't want the black people to sit in your section. And I get how that affects you financially and emotionally and psychologically, rather than you're a racist, ignorant, white trash piece of shit. How the fuck could you say this? I hate you.
I agree with
think
you.
that-
Discourse
Right.
should be completely changed if we want better results.
But in order
but I
to
never
do that,
said
we have
that
to.
being racist is shouldn't be called out, right? I'm just
No,
saying
no, you
I
didn't. I
can't
think you said-
discern people's intents, so
I
I'm
think you
not gonna bother with that.
I think you said that you can't talk people out of being racist.
Yeah,
I think
you
that's what
did.
you implied.
I never said that,
No,
and
you
I
did.
don't think that's true.
Do you think you can talk people out of being racist?
I think you can talk some people out of reducing their conscious racist choices and biases.
Do you
I
you can
think
talk
that
them
everyone are a little
meaningfully-
bit racist.
Do you think you can meaningfully talk people out of being racist on a mass scale?
If they are racist in a conscious way, then yeah. But I think everyone are unconsciously a bit racist about something.
Right. So
I'm
a
not
question I
racist.
wanted us to get at about earlier, though, is something I really thought was important to address with one of the questions I was trying to get at was what do we do about the unconscious racism, right? Because that still has implications in our society today when it comes to hiring practices and things like that. How do we actually make a meaningful
As I
difference
said,
against
you make
inflation?
Yo,
social
Doobie's freaking me
progress.
out. You guys see
Hold on.
this shit?
I think y'all are granting way too much, and it's almost ridiculous to me.
Me too.
When
Me too.
y'all are giving way too much credence to this concept of unconscious bias. When people are committing these actions, they understand what's happening. It's a pure cope to act like they don't understand what they're doing. Oh, I'm just tossing the resume away. I don't even really understand what's happening in my head. It left my desk and went into the trash. No, these people absolutely understand the decisions, and that's why I said choices earlier. And you took some problem with that, but these people understand the choices that they're making. To try
Who
and
are these people?
infantile-
Is these all people?
Wait, I didn't
Yeah.
say it was all people. I'm talking about the people that make the choice to discard black resumes just because they're black resumes. I
Yeah,
thought
but
that
when
was
I'm
clear.
talking
But
about
some of them
implicit-
don't make that
This is-
decision because of the black. They do end up making the decision to toss the resume out. But the point with unconscious biases is that they lead you to racist results. But the justification in your head are not, I just hate black people.
Well, some are conscious and some are unconscious.
I think
Why
what
don't we
Gambit
just
is
stick
saying
with
is
what
that
we're
like
talking about?
an example of like an unconscious racist thing might be something like I just assume that everybody wants straight hair or something, like a very white centric, like you just assume that. And that's kind of like an unconscious racist thing. But when you're like, I'm not gonna hire a motherfucker called Tyrone. Sorry, that ain't happening. To call that like unconscious racial bias feels
It's
a little
wrong.
bit
I didn't,
infantilizing.
though.
No, I don't know.
That's
Hold on.
not my-
I'm not saying you didn't. Chill. I'm just saying
Don't
that
yell
like.
at me.
Okay, then don't correct me when I'm not incorrect. Okay.
Oh boy.
All I'm saying is that what Gambit is saying is it seems like we have this huge classification of like accidental racism when most racism is a little bit more overt than that. I think that's what Gambit is getting at.
Yes.
Okay, but
For sure.
is that always a bad thing, right? So like,
Yes.
Yes.
the example someone used
Oh,
earlier.
boy.
The example someone used
Doobie,
earlier.
Doobie.
Right, so if I were a woman walking in Central Park, right, and this black dude this creepy fucking black dude is hassling me about my dog, right, and trying to call my dog over to him, and I know that 90% of the rapes and murders in New York City are committed by black and brown people. Is it wrong for me to have some kind of extra fear that I wouldn't have if there was an Asian dude doing it? or a white dude
It's
doing
not
it.
wrong to
I don't-
have
I
the
don't
fear,
think
but
so.
you also
don't- I
included
don't-
the information that he's creepy. So
Yeah, you
That-
you
that's
had it.
Yeah, I
valid.
don't think it matters if what his skin color is, what he looks like. If he's creepy,
Okay,
then
well then
Yeah.
then is it
Get away.
wrong
Or
for
if
that?
he's a
Say,
guy.
hold on. So
Either
Is
would
it
it be
wrong
wrong?
to discriminate against a normal
creepy
looking
guy
black
is-
person?
Oh,
I mean,
God. So I think Katie
Yeah,
said
I
earlier,
don't,
right?
I don't
Creepy
think
guy.
we
Katie said
care
earlier,
what
oh,
their
God,
color is.
please.
I just
But
think we
that-
You
care
got it.
that
but
they're
the
You're-
idea
I got
of
it.
who
We got
is
it. We got it.
creepy.
Please, no, wait, really quickly, really quick. So Katie said earlier that she like intentionally forces herself to stay on the same road as like a dude like coming toward her, just so she doesn't seem like racist or whatever the fuck.
No,
Right,
not so I don't seem racist. To not enact racism.
Sure, but
There's a
if a woman
difference.
who was more concerned with her safety, let's say she was aware of these stats, didn't even want to risk the situation, right? Could we really fault her for
It
going to the other
doesn't-
side of the street? Like,
No,
is
not
she,
even
she
that.
actually
I
hurting
don't-
anybody?
I don't
I
think
don't
that we
think
have
that
to.
means
It doesn't have to be a
that
binary
isn't
of
concerned
whether
for her
we're faulting her or
safety.
not. It is
God.
understandable and also immoral. And so if she crosses the street,
I agree
we
with
can
Mr.
empathize with
Girl.
that. We can
Why is that
understand the
immoral?
practicality of that, and we can also be upset that it's racist. And if
Is
she
it immoral
stays,
to put on your seatbelt when you get in the car to take an extra step to protect
It's
yourself?
not
it doesn't
the
hurt a
same.
black
It's
person's
really not
fucking
the same.
feelings when you put on your
How is that
seatbelt.
the
It's pretty
same?
similar.
No,
It's
if-
actually not similar
if
because
you
your seatbelt
assume
isn't a
that-
person. The seatbelt isn't a person, and a black person is. That's the difference.
if you
is this unfair? I know we don't like labeling people stuff, but you are explicitly in favor of racist policies and racist attitudes. Why aren't you a racist?
That's
Wait,
untrue. So
Oh.
I'm not in favor. I don't believe that any racial group is superior or inferior. What I'm saying is that given the stats as they currently are, right? I think some of these policies might be justifiable, right? I'm not saying that black
Oh.
people are like inferior or that they're more.
But
You
you
are
agree that the
Wait, one
stats
second.
they
Wait,
are
one
the way
second.
they
Wait,
are
one second.
because
Please,
of
wait.
factors
I'd
outside
like
of
to
the
finish.
race.
I'd like to
Yeah,
finish.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
what he's
yeah.
asking,
Wait,
is
really
instead
quickly.
of
I'm not
instead of
saying. I'm
getting
not
into-
saying. Oh God,
You're-
Mr. Girl,
here's the
one
problem.
second.
I-
One second.
let me
I can tell you the
help you.
problem.
I can help you.
You don't
I'm
need to
gonna
help me.
dig
I don't
you
need
out
your
of
help.
this.
I love you.
You're
I
in-
love
you're
you.
in
You're
trouble.
beautiful.
You know that you're in
beautiful,
trouble.
but I don't need your help. Okay, please.
Let him
You
help
do.
So what I'm saying.
you need
what
my
I'm saying-
help.
I can
You
fix
need
him.
a PR guy.
One second, please.
Okay.
You need a
Oh,
PR guy, and
God.
I'm going to take your
Jimmy.
case.
I would love that actually.
I'm gonna help
okay,
you.
really
Let
quickly.
me-
no,
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 no, stop,
All
stop.
right,
No,
wait. I
Doobie,
said
please,
Doobie.
please,
Doobie, please.
please,
Oh, okay.
please. Okay. So what I'm saying, right, is I'm not saying that these stats are the way they are because these groups of people are genetically predisposed to behave this way. There are obviously socioeconomic circumstances that have led to things being the way they are. And until we address those circumstances, this is the reality people are living in. So given that this is the reality, I think it's totally understandable, justifiable, and not immoral. I think it'd be totally morally in line with someone's belief systems to take themselves out of a potentially dangerous situation. I think it's totally fine. And if
Would
we
you
can
call it
understand,
racist?
no, I wouldn't.
Fine
If we-
and
I
racist,
call
right?
it prejudice, but not racist. And if we
I
can
gotta-
understand,
I gotta-
if
Why
we
would
can
you be
understand,
racist
if we can
based on
understand
race?
why a black person,
Romantic.
why a black person in the United States would
God.
feel some kind of way about being pulled over by the police or interacting with a police officer, given the stories that they see about police brutality and cops planting evidence and racism and all this kind of shit.
The stories
We can
they
understand-
see.
If we can understand that feeling leading to them making generalizations and having prejudice feelings toward every cop they fucking see, I think we can understand why a white woman
Well, it's
walking along in the
prejudice on
park
the
You can
basis of
change
would
your
have the same
job.
kind of
You
feelings
can't
about
change
a
your
black
skin
dude
tone.
or a Hispanic dude in the park.
So it's prejudice on the basis of race, but not racism. Is that correct?
No, it's not prejudice on
Police
the
is
basis of
not a
race.
race.
You said it was
Prejudice
prejudice,
based
right?
on the
Was it prejudice?
reality of the
Doobie,
crime
Doobie,
stats
Doobie,
as they
Doobie.
exist.
Was
Doobie,
it
you're digging a
prejudice?
hole deeper for yourself, my
Doobie,
friend.
you gotta let me get you out
I
of
am
this.
on top
Trust
of the
me.
whole
This
bearing
is
you
what I
down right
do.
now.
This is what I do. Listen. Okay. The
I feel like he's
problem
gonna get you
is
in more trouble now.
the problem is that you are racist. Okay, and that's okay.
Gonna hurt my
This is,
feelings.
this is the stance you have to take. You just have to say, if you guys are defining racism as unempathetically making practical decisions that hurt people of color because it's the most logical thing to do at any given time, and I'm weighting my own safety and comfort over the feelings of oppressed people. If you're going to say that's racism, then yeah, I guess I am racist. That's all you
But
have
it's
to
not
say. And
logical.
instead of it is logical. His logic is sound. The only reason
His
it's not.
logic isn't sound.
No, it is
His
absolutely.
logic is
Listen, let me
like,
finish.
not
Let me
very
finish.
intelligent.
Hold on, let Mr. Girl finish.
He told us a lot when he compared avoiding black people to buckling your seatbelt. So whether or not
Yeah,
the
that he's a
statistical
racist.
difference, Whether or not the yes, I know, but I want to unpack what that means. Whether
True.
and I have like an emotional scuba mask that I can swim down into this, and I'm gonna find a little gold nugget and bring it back to you. What he's
Please, I need
saying,
help with that. I am
I'm
so
gonna,
dumb
I
on
got
my
it.
own.
I've got.
Just let them do it.
It's not about intelligence. It's just a strong stomach. Listen, what I'm saying is, when you compare a seatbelt to a black person, even if it's the same ratio as safety to danger, what you're leaving out in the seatbelt analogy is that the seatbelt isn't a person, doesn't have feelings, doesn't deserve an equal and free society the way a black person does. And so in Doobie's moral scale, he just doesn't weight that very high. And he weights it low enough that we are all in the panel willing to call him racist. And Doobie, what you're doing is you're engaging in a semantics debate, and it makes you look bad because it makes it seem like you don't understand what racism is, because you are racist, and yet you think racism is bad and don't want to be called racist. So I think I would strongly advise you to just say, if you're saying that my practicality here is hitting the threshold of racism, then yeah, I guess I'm racist. But I don't want you to think that black people are genetically inferior. I just think that the situation is what it is, and we should just let it play out that way.
I don't like the end of that distillation
This
because
is
that implies that somehow we have an
like,
idiosyncratic
affirmative.
definition of racism. Our definition of racism in this context
we do have an idiosyncratic
not
definition
right
of
here
racism.
as applied. I mean,
within this panel and on Twitch and among progressives, we don't at all. But in the greater world, most people think, well, if I'm not calling somebody the N-word and like throwing rocks at them, then I'm not racist. So I don't know what the fuck
I'm
you
sorry,
guys are talking
this
about.
is just nonsense. I mean, do you think it's idiosyncratic to believe that segregation is racism?
Idiosyncratic by definition means unusual. And if you poll people across the globe in every different country and ask them if they share your definition of racism, they will say no.
I'm talking about Americans in America who would, I think, all agree.
Americans, I don't know that. I think there's a big debate right now about what the definition of racism is.
Should we include animals in our definition of who conceives what as racism? I mean, how broad are we going to go with this level of generality? I'm assuming that most Americans think that explicitly race-based policies.
I don't think including animals as a
what's wrong with limiting it to America?
As a fake thing that I'm saying, I'm mentioning animals makes sense. When I'm saying within the Twitch panel, it seems that 8 of us have a shared definition of racism. One of us has a different definition of racism. I think we can just acknowledge that. We don't have to talk about it for a fucking hour.
Ours is not
Jesus Christ, Doobie, fucking, you're freaking me out. I think that Doobie's definition of racism
Do the time thing again.
I think Doobie's definition of racism is pretty common among Americans. You may have a different sense of that. I think it's better to just be bilingual. I understand Doobie's definition. I understand your definition. I like your definition. It's even my definition. That doesn't mean we don't.
How do you know Doobie's comment or the majority? I mean, are you just pulling this out of your ass?
Yes.
Well, my definition of racism is what you'd find if you looked up the word racism in the dictionary, I think. But really quickly, so MrGirl,
most common
Mr. Girl, I need to correct.
panel.
I need to correct a couple. Well, the most common definition on this panel is incorrect. Then, so
no,
you said that I was that seatbelts were not black people. Black people in that situation wouldn't be the seatbelt. Walking across the street would be the seatbelt. A bad situation with a black person would be like the car
No one's
accident.
feelings are hurt.
Right? So I'm
you buckle
explaining
your
there,
seatbelt.
right? What I'm saying there is getting raped or murdered by a black person in that analogy that I came up with.
When you
or
buckle
metaphor
your
that I came up
seatbelt
with
for your safety,
was
you're making it worse. When you buckle
what I'm
your
saying is
seatbelt,
that going across the street is the equivalent of putting on your seatbelt. Now, an actual
the bad part of crossing the street,
just in case something bad happens.
The bad part of crossing the street.
Wait, really quickly, please. I'd like to just finish my statement.
But you've already derailed.
No, I haven't derailed. I haven't derailed anything.
Let him finish, Doobie.
I think.
Oh
I
God.
think that we can all, and Mr. Gray, I think you said this earlier, right? That we can all understand when a minority in the United States feels a certain way about interacting with the police, thinks that the police officer might be racist toward them, might beat them up, might plant evidence, yada yada, whatever the fuck, right? Even though if we look at the actual stats on those issues, it's a very, very small percentage of police interactions where any of that takes place.
How do you know? How do you know that?
I,
Sorry, how do
I
you know
get
that?
where you're
How
going.
do
Can
you
I
know
respond
that?
now?
on
And
this.
explain?
If you want to say that there might be this might be happening, we just don't know about it. Well, go to your
I can
fucking
How do you know
concisely
what you
pull out a
explain why
number
you're wrong.
and come back to me. But the numbers that I have access to.
What numbers
right?
are those?
The numbers
like
don't
less
matter.
Than,
Your analogy
less
doesn't
than
make
a
any
percent.
sense. It
Right?
literally
No,
doesn't
I'm
matter.
not done speaking. I'm not done speaking.
I know, but it
Please,
doesn't matter
please
what
let
else
me
you want to
finish.
say.
Please let me finish.
Hey,
need to get
like
in
when
here.
you all talk at once, literally no one can hear you, so it's pointless. It's literally pointless. Doobie, finish what you're trying to say.
Then can I get in, Prime?
I want to respond. I want to respond. He's impugning my analogy, and I want to respond.
You impugn my analogy first. It was my analogy.
It'll be very short. It'll be the shortest thing
listen,
you've ever.
Go ahead.
Shut up. Wait,
Doobie.
listen, please. So what I'm saying is that we can understand Black people feeling a certain way about interacting with police, and not just Black people, but any minority person in this country interacting with police. We can understand it's like the prejudice notions they'd have about that police officer. I think we should extend that same level of empathy toward a woman who walks across the street when she sees a Black dude walking toward her and she's by herself. Right? I think I don't understand why, Mr. Gray, your whole thing is about having empathy for people, but you can't extend this empathy to that woman.
I'm
who
extending.
might want to take an extra step. I don't need
it
it right now. Who might want to take an extra step?
Oh, but you
to
do.
protect herself and just cross the fucking street. She's not hurting anybody by doing that.
That is that last part.
And one more last thing. I think Dylan keeps asking, what should we do to address this, right? Well, we should find ways to make sure that 90% of the rapes and murders in New York City aren't committed by Black and brown people. I think if that's stopping the case, people wouldn't have these prejudices or have these stereotypes in their head.
Okay, wait. Can I suggest something? Can we get a definition of racism for the panel?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna do. Wait,
we're on like
exactly what I was gonna do.
Can I respond, Prime?
We're on 8 different levels of conversation right now.
Wait, I need to get in here. I just need to get in here because I need to address exactly what Destiny said there. I think it's important that Doobie brought up the fact that there was a dictionary definition of racism and that somehow his was it against the grace of Jah Almighty, okay? So when we look at the definition of racism, right, it's prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a people or person or people based on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. So the policies that we're talking about here and the ones that Doobie seems fitting to enact are definitionally racist. Doobie, what you are trying to do here is make a case as for why racism's not bad, I guess, but that is exactly what it sounded like Mr. Girl was saying, and I'm going to roll with that. However, I think it's important that you understand that, yes, by definition, what you are trying to enact is racist. Thank God.
Okay, so you took the Oxford definition. Oxford sucks, okay? I go with Merriam-Webster because I'm American.
Stop.
Merriam-Webster definition, if you were to look this up, is the belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. I'm not making any superiority claims. I'm not a white person. If I were to do that, right, I'd probably say that.
Wait, okay, hold on, stop, Doobie. You can't really believe it. If I run around and I scream and I call every Black person the N-word, but I don't think they're worse than white people. I just call them the N-word. Does that mean you're not racist? Because I don't think they're inferior?
Wait, hold on.
Prime. Please.
Hold on. You can use a racial slur without being racist. I call people racial slurs all the fucking time. I'm not a racist.
Doobie.
I love everybody.
Doobie.
Right? So yeah, if I went around and called Black people the N-word with a hard R all fucking day, that you could take from that. You can make the inference that I'm a racist, but I don't think it'd be necessary.
Is it a racist act?
And I think making that assumption about me would be kind of rude, to be honest.
Doobie.
Is it a racist act?
Analogies are wrong, and I'm going to explain why.
Wait, hold on. I'm going to give you.
Doobie,
this is
this is
on topic.
Doobie.
It's his turn to talk, Doobie.
So if an Arab Palestinian were to call Israeli Jews a K word, right? Would we say that's a racist?
There's a K word?
Yeah, there is a K word.
No.
There's a K word?
I'd say that could be justified given the fact that they live under the oppression of an Israeli ethno state that outlines specific rights for Jews above Arabs.
Doobie, I'm trying to help you. And so if you're trying to get under my skin,
oh my God.
I don't care about Israel any more than I care about any other country. I'm here to help you, and I need you to listen to me very carefully. Doobie, the last part of what you said was, when you cross the street, when a Black person is on the other side, you're not hurting anyone. And I implore you to understand that most people on this panel, I would say everybody, disagrees with that part. If that were true, then what you were saying and the stuff and all the analogies you're making would be absolutely perfect. If it didn't hurt black people when you throw their resume in the trash can, then that would be a great plan. If it didn't hurt black people when you flee from them when they enter a park, that would also be really great. However, it does hurt them. It hurts them probably in pretty much every way imaginable when you add it all up. But in the moment, it hurts their standing, it hurts their dignity, it hurts their feelings, it hurts them psychologically. It's not good. Trust me, having people be terrified of you and flee whenever you come near them it's not a good feeling. So I think that your seatbelt analogy falls apart there. The police analogy, we're not talking about, yes, we can empathize with black people who are afraid of the police. I can empathize with you being afraid of or wary about black people or people of color committing more crimes. I'm not saying that I don't extend you empathy when I advise you to just bite the bullet and say that you're racist by this panel's definition. That's not what I'm saying. However, a police officer does not have, in this country, we do not say that the police have the right to not have their feelings hurt. That's part of their job. That's why we pay them. Their job is to have a series of unpleasant experiences throughout their day, resulting in the rest of us be safer. Black people have not signed up for that. So it's not a good analogy. And what you should just admit is that the rest of us care about all this other shit I'm talking about more than you do.
I feel like maybe I'll use another not even analogy, a comparison.
Please
to make it a little easier for you guys to understand.
Refrain from another analogy.
Make it a tiny bit easier.
Yourself,
a tiny bit easier for you guys to understand. Okay, where I'm coming from here. Okay,
we understand.
So we know. Wait, really quickly.
We understand.
We know.
Right?
We can pull the stats on this. We can pull the stats on this. That the vast majority of people who molest children are not actually pedophiles. Right? They're just they're sexual opportunities.
Okay.
That is absolutely the
I think I'm on Doobie's side. I take it back. I think
hold on.
Doobie's
However,
the rest of you.
And we know that the vast majority of people in this country. I think I'll pull this out in a second. But the vast majority of people in this country who are pedophiles, right? Don't actually act on those urges. Don't actually molest children. The vast majority of them.
10%, if I remember correctly.
So if a but even so, if a pedophile were to come to you, someone who you knew was a pedophile had these urges, even if they've never acted on them in their entire fucking lives, they came to you and said, "Hey, you need someone to watch your kid this weekend."
Oh, so your analogy is built on the idea that I don't empathize with pedophiles. Well,
you're not empathizing with pedophiles.
Have I got some fucking bad news for
women?
You just walked into a minefield.
I love the minefield. Okay?
You done fucked up.
But I'm telling you, if we can say it's understandable for a parent in that situation to say, "Hey, no, I can't leave my kid with you because I know you're a pedophile," even though vast majority of you guys don't do this, even though the vast majority of people that actually molest children are not pedophiles, I'm still not going to leave my kid with you because I'm making some assumptions based on you being a pedophile, right? Why can't we extend that same empathy
because there's
that we would have for the parent in that situation?
He's
making a prejudice decision to the woman who crosses the street.
Wait. All right, so we're gonna go to Katie. We're gonna kiss you. Katie,
I can respond to that really quick. Really quickly, and then Katie.
I like it.
You're taking information that you knew about the specific person you're being prejudiced against, whereas in the situation with black people, you don't know anything specific about that person, and you're applying the same ideology. That's the problem.
That's a good argument. If you knew someone was 0% offending and was
No. Now I talk.
He knew the person was. He specifically said he knew the person was a pedophile.
Yeah, but someone being a pedophile, he's defining a pedophile as
black people
10%
as a pedophile because the pedophile
chance
has
of
an
acting
internal
on it.
urge to do a bad thing. And
No,
stop. A black person.
Yeah.
So
really funny.
That's not what I'm saying.
No,
Katie,
guys,
go ahead.
don't steal my point, please.
I hate you so much.
I'm happy that you brought the pedophile analogy.
Me too. Fuck, it's relieving.
I would love to talk about this more.
Oh, chinga su madre.
I can breathe now.
Okay. A pedophile has a psychiatric condition that makes them attracted to prepubescent people. Okay? That is, you can call it inherent, you can call it learned, we can discuss it. That is a trait that they have. The fact that black people that certain statistics correlate with people being black is not specific traits that they have.
Yeah, but he's not saying the attraction to the child is not the. But that's not the
Shush.
analogy.
No.
You have to
It
relate
is.
it to
Hold on. Katie.
the probability of them
Katie!
actually
Is your name
hurting a
Katie?
child.
Katie, please go.
Thank
That's what
you.
you have to compare it to.
I thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
So you are comparing things like seatbelts that are inherently protective of a person during a like car crash, and being black, which has none of the negative properties that you're assigning to. You're saying being black correlate with A, B, and C, so why doesn't it make sense for me to make decisions based on that? And nobody said women aren't allowed to make the executive choice for themselves in that moment to value their own safety and cross to the other side of the street. It
Pedophilia is not the negative
prejudice.
trait there.
Shut up.
It's child
It
abuse.
is prejudice, though. And
All right, that's
as
enough
I said
internet.
before, it is dependent on the harm that it would do to the individual. So when you're comparing inherent negative qualities to being black, that is disanalogous and that is racist as fuck and is
No, it's
very weird and makes no sense.
It's not weird
Yes.
or
It's
disanalogous.
literally not
in his
analogous
analogy,
at all.
in the analogy, pedophilia is not the negative trait, or it's the
It's child
percentage
abuse.
chance of abusing the child that he's
Yeah.
comparing to the percentage chance of a black person or
I
whatever
understand,
person.
and we can talk about pedophilia if you want, but
No,
he
no.
made a lot of points before
So, hold
that
on.
too, so
No,
I'm just
wait, no, no,
ignoring
no,
the
no, no,
pedophilia
no.
thing.
You
Mr.
should
Girl's
either
point
reject
right
his
here is
analogy or follow his actual
He
analogy.
made
but
like
it seems
3
like you don't
analogies.
understand it.
All of them are disanalogous. I'm
No,
good.
hold on, wait,
Thanks.
No, they're
wait.
not.
Let me help Mr. Girl, because I know he wants to jump in to defend pedophilia, but this is ridiculous. So the
Well,
problem
I'm
is
defending.
None of-
I'm
none of
defending
that- none of
truth.
that right
No,
now,
no, listen,
please.
I'm
listen,
defending
I can
truth and logic.
I can walk
I-
you through this, Mr. Girl. Let me
Okay.
save you. Let me put on my scuba gear. I'm gonna save you. I'm gonna rescue you.
Okay, come
Okay.
on in.
So the individual person in these scenarios, in one
Yeah.
scenario, it's a black person that you're walking across the street to, and you can say that there's some percentage chance racially that this
Yeah.
person could be a individual that would want to rob you or something, right?
No. You've already
No,
dismantled.
I'm gonna finish.
We're
that.
saying there's some percentage chance this person will rob you.
Yeah, but obviously we're okay with discriminating on the basis of attraction to children.
No,
That's an okay basis of discrimination.
No,
We're not
hold on.
generally
That
okay.
is a
No,
fine
okay?
example.
No,
That is
no,
a fine
I'm actually
response.
gonna
It's the obvious
No, no,
answer.
That's a
hold on,
totally
hold on. I'm
that is
actually
a
gonna
logical
finish.
response to
No,
Doobie's
I'm gonna-
analogy.
I'm
That's-
actually gonna
yeah.
finish. I'm actually gonna
okay.
finish. Okay.
Okay, but
So with the guy on the other side of the street, you
Yeah.
have no real reason to think that he's. See, you tried to say that those things are equal. They aren't. You have no reason to believe this person is a person that would do that 10% chance.
they're if
For
the
the-
person is black and black, let's make it really even. Let's say that every time a black person walks by you on the street, there's a 10% or say throughout their lives, black people 10% are likely to just randomly mug somebody on the street. 10% of them, they just tend to do this. So now we have our equivalency set up. We don't need to look at real statistics. So
Yeah,
And the answer is as obvious as it was. when
10% of
you stated it.
pedophiles
The
offend,
answer is as obvious as
10%
it
of
was
black
when you
people
stated
mug
it.
you while you're
The
walking.
answer is
Yes,
as obvious as it was when you stated it. I
So
mean,
let me
it's
help
been-
you with this.
One
Let
is
me
an
help you
okay
with
Go help me.
Hold on,
and the other is
hold on.
not an okay form of discrimination because we're more worried about discrimination against a racial
No,
minority
it's not even
than we
that.
are
It's
about
not even that.
discrimination
No,
against.
that's who.
No, Pisco, I'll let you
That is
argue that.
absolutely the case.
Hold on, I'll let you
Pisco's-
argue that next.
Oh
Pisco.
my
Pisco's
God.
argument is
Gambit,
I think the
go ahead.
only valid response to
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
but I will.
Yeah.
I want to hear
I'd like to
yours
respond
anyway.
to Pisco at some point.
So
Gambit.
listen, Miss Girl, in this situation with the pedophile,
Yes.
we know in Doobie's example, he knows that this person is of the class that could commit the action.
And
Well,
black
hold
people
on,
are
I'm
of
gonna
the class
finish.
that also
No.
could commit a
Let him finish. Let him
mugging.
finish. Gambit.
So I don't think these things are analogous at all. Like
How?
you don't know.
They are.
No,
A black
so
person
the-
could
Hold on,
mug you, and a
could rape a
pedophile
child, and a
could
black.
abuse
Yes,
you.
it's the same thing technically. Yes, it is.
So
Yeah.
Thank you, Dustin.
there's a difference when you
look,
So
Doobie's,
no.
you're letting
I'm-
Doobie fuck with your head
No,
because it's
you're not letting me finish. No, y'all just keep
No, but he's
interrupting me.
fucking
every
with
time
you.
I say-
He's comparing black people to
Okay,
pedophiles.
all right.
Right
Oh
back,
my
Gambit.
God.
Don't let him interrupt you.
Yeah, Gambit, keep going.
Okay, so listen. Even if you first off, somebody has to be somebody that would rob, and then second off, they have to be willing to rob in that scenario. So
Somebody that-
you're gonna let me finish. You're not gonna talk right now. You're gonna look at me, but you're gonna just let me finish. Okay, so it's just like the pedophile situation. We wouldn't say you could look at all men and assume they are a pedophile, and then assume that 10% chance, if they were a pedophile, that they would commit this crime. You're making this assumption on the black person. The black person first has to be somebody that would rob you, and then it has to be, are they going to rob you? So there's two levels of this, right? There's a level of, will they commit a crime, and will they do it now? The same thing is with men and pedophiles. It's, is this person a pedophile? And then if they are a pedophile, will they commit this crime? You're taking the second level of, this person is a known pedophile and they could commit this action, to the broader group of, I don't even know if this person would commit a crime. And you're making those two things equivalent.
Are you using pedophile and child
I need to
molester?
explain this. I need to explain this to Gambit really quickly. The thing that we're talking about here, though, is non-offending pedophiles, like Mr. Girl was referring to.
Yeah, I
right?
was
He's
gonna
talking
ask.
about child abuse as
Non-offending
being different.
pedophiles like Mr. Girl ...
Yeah. Okay.
referring
Right.
to. I
Right.
saw what
Okay.
you fucking did there.
I understand that. Yep, Mr. Girl. Believe me, I'm trying to have your back here. So the difference is knowing that someone's going to commit an action is completely different when you're just taking two corollary statistics,
Okay.
like people being attracted to children, and then that automatically leading
Okay.
to
You
child
can just
abuse
ask
versus
him.
someone being
Gambit,
black.
can I respond to Gambit?
Hold on, Dylan. The analogy would have to be, this is a black person that we have reason to believe will rob you. Because the pedophile, we have reason to believe that they may commit an action.
No,
No, you
Gambit,
don't.
Gambit,
No,
can I
you
respond
don't.
to Gambit? I want to respond, Gambit. Can I respond to you?
Yeah, for sure.
Are you
Absolutely.
ready?
Mhm.
Okay.
take it away.
If we just say correlation and we just say 10% of black people will mug you or mug somebody, and 10% of pedophiles will offend. The label and the reason they are that way and what they're thinking and what the non-offending pedophiles are thinking, for the purpose of pure safety of a binary of did the act occur or not occur? Were you hurt or harmed by this person or not? Everything else can be ignored. And what Doobie is doing, which I enjoy a little bit of myself, but he's making it very confusing, because we've decided that it is okay, as Pisco's pointed out, we've decided it's okay to ostracize or be super wary of pedophiles because we don't care about hurting their feelings as much. And also, let me finish.
I'm gonna let you finish. You didn't let me finish. I'm gonna let you finish, then I'll respond.
Okay.
Based.
That's nice of you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think my answer to the analogy is that a pedophile, unlike a black, and maybe this is what you're getting at, a pedophile, unlike a black person, can be expected to kind of just absorb that. If we say, hey, look, you are probably fantasizing about this kid, so we don't really want you to babysit the kid. And like, that might hurt your feelings. You might think you could do a good job of it anyway, and 90% chance you probably could. It's not worth it to us. And so we are going to hurt your feelings. And what I would like, in the nicest way possible, we're going to say you can't be around children. You just can't.
Yeah, and this
and to a
pedophile
black
might
person
think
to
your kid is
say
fucked up.
you're not allowed to walk down the street next to a white. You can't walk by a white woman on the street. It's an unacceptably harsh, unempathetic stance to take. In one, and in the other, it's just not.
You don't discriminate on the basis of
emotional
race, but you can discriminate if someone has a tendency to crime. If we were able to know that someone has a 20% tendency to crime, and that's all we knew about them, then it would be perfectly okay to discriminate on the basis of just we know they're going to commit a robbery. Just like,
but the difference is
not a
purely
protected
emotional. We just
No,
don't
I
feel
have
good
a simple
about
question
the
for
basis
him,
of
Pisco.
your race. That is the condition under which you're
Okay,
not
so
allowed.
how is
feel
it
the
any
correlation
different from
strong enough,
sexuality?
and it
No,
hurts
No,
people's
but
feelings.
hold on, but
If
them
you
being a
don't know
pedophile
them,
is also probably an immutable characteristic.
No, hold on,
of
Mr. Girl was
that they have
talking.
no control over.
Yeah.
Right,
It's
but
not
we're
about
comfortable,
whether
we're
we're
comfortable with.
Okay,
It's socially
look, the
acceptable
difference-
to talk about the ways that you guys want to torture and murder pedophiles anytime that topic comes up.
What?
Yes, but that's a good example.
But we know, even though we know that the vast
the
majority
way
of
that-
people also don't, wait 1 second, don't molest children.
Doobie,
And
you're
the vast
just
majority of people that do
Doobie,
molest
Doobie.
children, are not pedophiles.
Okay,
The way
can we let
most
Mr.
people
Girl
feel
finish?
about the way you feel about black people is how most people feel about pedophiles. They don't care about saying, "Hey, you can't do this. You're scary. You're gonna have to be treated differently."
Same. It's not the same. Oh my God. Why are you doing this?
Hold on. No, hold on, wait. Mr. Girl.
Yeah,
Mr. Girl.
okay.
Okay.
Yes.
This is what you're doing. Let me make this really simple to you.
Okay.
All right. You're walking down the street late at night, right?
Yeah.
There's two people on the street, and one is on the left and one is on the right. Both of them are black, right? So let's say, hold on.
Where am I
Let's
gonna
say you had, let's say you had information that one of them potentially wanted to commit murder, and let's say you had no information on the other guy at all. No, hold on. Which person? So the person that has contemplated murder before, and we have suspicion to believe that he may murder one day, is on the left side, and the person that we have no information on is on the right side. Where would you walk? Both of these people are black.
I would walk on the right side, but that's because
Why?
you've introduced a new corollary variable into your analogy. So it is no longer the original question; it's a new question.
What's the new corollary variable that I introduced in the situation?
Well, if you said one person was a black person who I knew had a 10% chance of mugging me, and the other person is just a random black person, but black people on average have a 10% chance of mugging you, which would be the true analogy, then I would say it doesn't matter which side I walk on, because I know on average they're going to be the same.
Why don't I just ask the question, Mr. Girl, are you okay with discriminating with people on the basis of their pedophilic attraction?
I'll just let him escape.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Discrimination being like you can't work at a school?
Policies and attitudes like that, yes.
Attitudes
okay with that,
like
right?
that for the purposes of protecting children, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Are you okay with similar things with respect to race?
No. And I want to explain why.
Yeah, no, but that's the fundamental question, whether or not discrimination is on the basis.
It was kind of funny when I said to Doobie, we feel about pedophiles the way you feel about black people, but I'm serious. Like it's just an emotional argument. I mean, we just believe and we feel that it's not fair to do that to somebody based on how they look. It just feels wrong.
Wait,
and
so
even
to
the
be clear-
percentages might be the same, but in one case we feel it, in another case we don't. And Doobie, I think that's what you're not getting about this.
It also has to do with
I do get that. Hold on. So to be clear, I'm not afraid of black people. Right? I don't cross the street when a black person's walking. So I'm not.
I'm also not afraid of black people. I didn't know we were doing that.
What I'm saying, what I'm
proposing.
proposing.
Okay.
Well, because you guys have said that I'm racist.
What I'm proposing, everybody that didn't say that is afraid of black people.
Exactly. Everyone who didn't speak up, you're afraid of
even
black
if you said you're afraid of black, if you're not afraid of black people, you didn't mention all the other racial groups, you must be afraid of them, right? So
I am afraid of some of the other ones. I'm sorry, I'm kidding. Keep going.
Okay, wait. So,
damn Italians.
Fuck, you threw me off. Wait, no, I got it. Okay, so I'm not saying that I feel this way, right? That I would cross the street, or that I would that I wouldn't,
what I
dismiss.
Said. What I
dismiss
said
it. Wait, no, stop, please. I'd like to just.
Racial discrimination does not pull at your heartstrings the way it does for the rest of the panel.
Let me finish.
I don't want to talk about this anymore. You just don't care as much. You don't have to explain why.
Listen,
it doesn't matter why.
You're not understanding, right? I care more than you do.
Just don't care
I care
as much.
more than you do. That's the reality, right? What I'm proposing is that we should have empathy for the woman that chooses to cross the street, for the dude who sees a group of black guys coming toward him in an alley and turns and walks the other fucking way. We should have empathy for those people and not call them immoral for taking an extra step based on racial prejudice to protect themselves.
People.
Doobie, why is that true racial hiring? Doobie, would you offer this? If there was evidence that said that black people were somehow correlated with worse employees, why wouldn't you have empathy for someone who refuses to hire black people, or would you?
Yeah, I think that'd be fun.
Okay, so then
I said earlier.
That's fine. I also think we should have empathy for racist people who don't want to hire black people. And Doobie, I empathize with you and your stances. What I'm pointing out to you, and this is not a value judgment, is that you simply seem to not emotionally understand why when the rest of us picture a black person walking down the street and then they see a white woman come toward them, dart across the street, the rest of us get upset thinking about how it feels to be that black person, and you do not care enough about that to understand why we're saying.
I do understand.
Okay.
Well, what I'm saying is that you guys don't care. That you guys don't seem to care.
You don't feel strongly about it as the rest of us, right?
Not true. So
Wait,
what I'm saying is that you guys don't
Juby,
seem
it's
to care.
clear. You're
What-
okay.
oh my God!
with-
I'd like to
Yeah,
just finish the
yeah.
statement.
Finish the
You guys
statement.
don't seem to
He's
extend
just
that same level of care and empathy toward the woman who might be afraid.
Okay, let me
right?
put it
In
this
my-
way.
my
Let me put it this
cross-section,
way.
she's
Let me
afraid and she
let
wants
me
to put
lay
herself
this
in a
out really
position.
clearly.
You have